What's up, YouTube? My name's Chris, and welcome to the last video of the tutorial series where I'm going to talk about the mixing and mastering of Track Collider. So first, a caveat. Mix downs and mastering are super hard for me and super frustrating, and so I don't think this is the video you want to be watching to learn how to mix and master music. Let me just put that out there. Having said that, it seems like there's a lot of conversation on forums and stuff about how to do it. And so I thought, okay, I'll just at least show you how I do it, and it's your job to ignore it and do something better. So how do I go about this? First of all, I'll say this. One is sound design is critical. If your sounds don't sound good by themselves, mixing and mastering them with other sounds isn't going to make them sound better. So that's why I spend a lot of time on the sound design part, so that the sounds by themselves sound good. The second thing is, how you go about mixing your tune is up to you, but one thing I always do is mix as I go to some extent. As I'm writing it, I'll kind of get the levels right with the bass and drums, just because it helps to kind of hear how things sound when they're going to be done. So here's roughly how I go about my mix down. I start with the drums, right? And I'll have everything I'll have everything muted down. So here's kind of my drum master bus right here. You can see. And I'll just solo that guy, and I'll put it on the loudest part and the most busy part of the track. Let's get all the master effects off. So you can see the drums are peaking at -10, and that's on purpose. So my goal is, for a tune like this, typically is I'll set the drums at peaking at -10, and that's a good reference point for me. And usually I can fit everything to -6 to -4 once the mix is all said and done. And then I know that if I'm not at peaking at -6 or -4, I have work to do. So the next thing I do is, after I have the drums going, usually all these tracks would be brought all the way down. Then what I would do is bring this bass in. And so the way I would mix that in is just literally bring the slider up, and that's what I'll do for you real time. All right, so here we go. Okay, so then I kind of get the bass and drum sounding good, and then, as I talked about already, I have a little bit of a sidechain compressor on it. That's also a mixing tool that I use, and I've talked about that already. So once I have the drums and the bass working well together, then I kind of decide what other elements do I care a lot about. And in the case of this track, I really wanted to have these effects that are kind of incidentally playing during the drop to be at a good level. So I'll start bringing those in. In terms of EQing, I do that throughout the mixing process. So for example, if we look at the bass bus, this channel EQ is largely ducking at 200, or not ducking, but sucking out at 200 to make room for that snare. That's a mixing technique. And then I'm getting a little bit of the mids out, and then boosting the high and the low a little bit, just to kind of get the bass to be a little fuller and crisper. And what I probably did was I got this EQ tweaked in after adding the drums and making sure that they all sounded really good together. And so one of my general philosophies that I heard from another producer by the name of Rezo is to think of the frequency spectrum as a chest of drawers, right? And so you can't, if you try to put all your clothes in one of the drawers, not only is that drawer going to overflow and be a mess, right, but it's going to cause a dresser to be out of whack and want to tip over. So the mix is very similar in the frequency spectrum. So if we watch the analyzer on the bass, you can see at 200 there's just nothing going on. So it's making room for that snare. So when the snare hits, the snare is kind of sitting in that 200 hertz drawer, at least the idea of the snare, the main component of it. The kick is down here as well, but I've got the bass sidechain compressed with it to make room for it. So that's one philosophy I subscribe to. So let me show you some of the other mixing techniques I do. So let's look at the and let's listen to the intro right here. So there's a lot of low end going on there. But let's, I'm going to turn all this stuff on, and then we're going to play it into the drum drop and listen to what happens. Okay, so the low end totally drops out. So what's going on there? I think I alluded to this in a really old video, but let's see. Oh, I'm sorry, guys. Right, so what's going on here is I'm turning on a filter that's basically crushing all the low frequency information on that bus. So this single EQ right here is a low cut. And so when it's not on, right, it's not doing anything. But then right when the drums come in, I'm high passing the whole thing at 174 hertz. So what that's allowing is it's allowing the kick to be the main low end weighty element. And so that I can still have those orchestral perks hitting. So audibly to your ear, they're still in the mix, but they're not colliding with the kick. So you can see I use automation a ton, and I use it on all the tracks to kind of get different, whether it's volume, filters opening and closing. This is, I'm high passing the kick into the main drop here. So if we were to listen to that. Right, so that's not really a mixing tool, but it's definitely a composition tool that affects the mix. There's just all this kind of thing. So as long as you're kind of thinking about that chest of drawers analogy and getting your mix to be nice and even. So if we look at what this what it looks like with our eyes. There's some nasties up here. So this is obviously the bass and the kick right around here, taking up all this information. This is the main body of the snare, the kind of thing that hits you in the chest at a high volume. This is kind of all your high-end perks. I'm getting rid of all this information that doesn't do anything for me. And what I can see is I don't have any frequencies that are just obviously spiking up way too high that my ear might have missed or whatever. And that's kind of what I'm looking for in the final mix. And the way I have the span set up is, if you're familiar with the Fletcher-Munson curve, you kind of want, or you kind of need to have this volume slants because the low frequency tones need to be much higher in volume than the high frequency tones for your ear to perceive them at the same volume. But with the setting I have on span, which to be honest, I forget how to actually configure it. Just from A-Bing with other tunes, I know that a roughly kind of flat spectrum is at this setting is kind of a good mix in terms of balance, in terms of replicating on other systems. Again, I'm not the guy you want to listen about mixing. This is all homegrown knowledge, so I'll give you what I have. Okay, so that's the main idea behind mixing. So how do I go about mastering? Well, pretty much the same way, right? So I have a gain plugin. It's not doing anything on this track. I go through a little bit of overdrive. I'm only running half a dB. What is this emulating? This is emulating like going through a console desk. It's kind of warming up the mix a little bit. And then I go through this A1 stereo controller. And again, what I'm doing is, making sure everything in the low end is mono. Just like I did on the bass. I'm doing it again on the final mix. And then I have my bus compressor. So let's play the track at its loudest point, which is roughly over here. And let's watch this compressor. So you can see it's just tickling the mix. And I'm using this vintage VCA, which, if you know a little bit of history about compressors, this one's kind of known, VCA is kind of known as kind of the glue, or people used to call the glue. And I think it kind of does a job. It just kind of makes the whole thing sound a little bit more glued together, like it's one mix. Then I have a linear EQ. In this track, I was relatively happy with how I got everything in the mix. So I'm just taking off the really low end and then really high end just to kind of keep, make sure there's nothing going on there. It's rumbly. And then a little bit to taste to kind of bring out some of the sound and get rid of some of the boxiness, which, by the way, I didn't do enough of. That's my biggest complaint about the mix down. All right, a multipressor. Okay, I use this mostly because I'm still learning how to use multipressors or multi-band compression. And so I don't want to talk about this a lot because I still don't know enough to teach somebody else how to use one. It's largely by ear in this track. Let's go back over here. It doesn't really look like it's doing anything. It's not hitting the thresholds. So probably what I did is ultimately decided that I couldn't get it to work the way I wanted. And finally, everybody's favorite plugin on the master bus, the limiter. Let's see how much I'm sticking it to it. So it's going to get loud in case you're turned up. Okay, so it's kind of hovering around 3 dB reduction. It's dancing. I got a peak at 6. That's more than I would normally want to do. And this is probably a little heavy-handed, but I felt like the dynamics were still pretty good in the track, and I was overall happy with the mix down. I did print this track 4 or 5 times at different limiting levels just to kind of get a feel for what it was going to sound like. So again, this is all by ear. You just want to kind of listen to it and say, I don't want the loudest track, but I do want to push it into a limiter so it kind of feels burly, if you know, but don't just totally wreck the thing. I've heard that too in OSC. If you guys are, some of you watching, maybe are tempted to really push this limiter, don't do that. Nobody, especially it seems like in that competition environment, really cares about how quote unquote loud your track is. But I still use it because I do like to, when I A/B it with a more professional track, I like to kind of hear them at the same level. So the last point I'll make on this, that's kind of a rough mix. It's a very simple mastering process. 2 points I'll make. One is A/B your tracks with a professional track that you like, that's in the same genre as you have. I've learned a massive amount about how to mix doing that and just kind of listening for where all the elements are sitting. And the second point I wanted to make is that when you're mixing and mastering, doing this kind of work, do it fast and take breaks. So like if you work for half an hour, go take a break, have a coffee or whatever, and don't listen to your tune for a while, then go back and do it. I've noticed that what happens over time is I'll sit there tweaking on a mix and my ears get really tired, and then I start really increasing the high end on sounds, and I come back the next day and it just sounds totally awful. So I think about 30 minutes at a fairly low volume is about all you really want to do. And if you get it to sound punchy and weighty at a fairly low volume, I find that is a good indication that when you turn it up, it's going to really sound awesome. So don't mix the thing super loud in your face. Keep it low and just kind of get it sounding punchy, or in this case, for this track, if you're making like some really mellow chill out music, you probably don't want to be punchy. But for something like this, if it sounds punchy to kind of low volume, it's probably going to really be awesome when you crank it. All right, so again, I hope I didn't ramble too much. I hope that these tutorials were helpful to somebody out there in cyberspace, and that maybe somebody will, learn something from this. And, I had a lot of fun doing it, and I'll just say I hope to see you guys in some more One Synth challenges down the road. I've been taking a break. I've been kind of busy with some other things going on in life. So anyways, send me some messages. You can send me KVR. You can find me on DOA. You can find me on YouTube. And I like chatting about this stuff. And if you guys have any questions, if you want to share any of your tunes with me, send them over. I'm happy to give feedback. And if you have feedback for me, I'll take it too. So anyways, thanks for watching. And I'll see you in the next OSC, hopefully. Cheers.